Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here. Welcome back to the railway and welcome to a very special anniversary. 80 years ago, on this day in May 1945, the Reverend W. Awdry would release the very first book in his legendary railway series. And this series of books would of course go on to become one of the most beloved children's book collections of all time. And this series of books would then go on to be the driving force behind one of the most beloved children's television programs of all time. And I think it was that TV series that created the amazing Thomas and Friends community that is so strong today. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about my personal journey with Thomas and some of his friends, and how those characters, those wonderful characters, have influenced and changed my life in model railways. So let's jump into this. Many people discover model railways through Thomas, I think. But when I first started making notes for this video, I didn't think that was the case for me. I thought I discovered Thomas through model railways. I thought I started model railways first. But then the more I think about this, the more I think that's not actually the case. I think for me, Thomas actually did start it all. Now, I've talked to my parents about this. They say I didn't really watch Thomas as a child. I certainly don't remember watching a lot of it. I think I watched a bit, not a lot though. I did, however, have the Railway series, the books. Now, they weren't the kind of square-looking books that we usually see. I think my book of the Railway series was a much bigger book, like this kind of size, fully illustrated, and it had lots of the stories in it. I don't know about all, but it certainly had a lot of the more well-known ones. Now, I don't remember having these stories read to me, but apparently in my very younger years, before my memories begin, yes, apparently I did like those stories. I didn't have any of the Thomas models, the railway sort of model train models as a child, but apparently I did have a Henry model, little green engine. I think it was an 040. It wasn't a very realistic Henry. I'm sure it was Henry and not Percy. Perhaps it was supposed to be Percy. I don't have it anymore, I don't think. But it was about sort of so large, you'd pull it back and let it go and it would run forwards. If anybody remembers that toy, let me know. Was it Percy? I'm sure I used to call it Henry. Possibly that was just my ignorance. But anyway, that was it for my connection with Thomas. Like I say, for many years I didn't watch the show, and apart from having that toy and having those stories read to me as a child, that was it. But then about 15 years ago, everything changed. Me and my friend Peter went to my other friend Dan's house, and you might know Dan, he's here on YouTube, you might know him as TARDIS Rescue. But to me and my friends, he wasn't TARDIS Rescue, he was just our friend Dan. And we went to his house one day, and on the floor of his living room was 2 circuits of track. And on those circuits of track were a couple of trains. Now, I forget exactly what was in those trains. I think it was a Bachmann Henry and a Bachmann Gordon. I could be wrong about that, but it was 2 Thomas and Friends engines. They were set up on the floor of his living room, coupled up to a Cronky controller, and Dan was kind enough to let me and Peter have a drive of these engines. And I just caught the bug from this. I didn't know anything about model trains at the time, but I was fascinated by this idea that you could put a train on a track and using a controller that's nowhere near the train, you could make that train work seemingly by itself. I absolutely loved this, and from that moment on, I started thinking about model railways. Is this something I would like to try? So fast forward a little bit, I think Dan probably noticed that I was quite interested by this stuff, and so he organised for me, Peter and himself to go to a model railway exhibition. Now, this would have been the Midland Rail-X exhibition, which sadly doesn't happen anymore, but it happened at the Midland Railway Centre, I think that's what it's called. And yeah, this was fantastic. We looked at the layouts there, we looked at some of the traders and the stands where I saw that model trains were far too expensive for me to afford at the time. But again, I just thought, you know, this is a world I would love to get into. And then a little while after that, I got my first train set for Christmas, and the rest, as they say, was history. So a few years later, in 2016, the Sam's Trains channel now existed. I was making model railway videos pretty much for a living. And it was at this point that I rediscovered Thomas. I decided to buy a Hornby Thomas train set just to review, really. And here is the engine from that very set. I've had this nearly 10 years now, which is absolutely crazy. But anyway, I reviewed the train set. It's an old video. I don't think it was a particularly good review, but the review did so well. People absolutely loved the review, and I guess this was my first contact with the Thomas and Friends community. At this point, I thought Thomas was just something for children. I thought it was something that kids would enjoy. My review might have been enjoyed by parents or children looking to buy this set. I didn't think anything of it. But when I saw the comments on this Thomas and Friends train set review, I realised these aren't children. These are a lot of adults. These are a lot of people like me who are interested in Thomas and Friends. And I think that was a really cool moment for me, because I realised it's not embarrassing to like Thomas. You know, I was a bit shy about the fact that I thought Thomas was just a TV show for kids. I thought, why am I interested in this? Then I met all of these other people that felt the same, and those people are still around today. And that made me feel a lot better about it. So yes, there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of liking Thomas. You know, you might have liked it as a kid. It's fine if you still like it now. I certainly do. So I had a bit more confidence about me now. So at this point, me and my sister Jess, every morning with our breakfast, we would watch Thomas when he came on. It would have been the CGI series 2016, 2017. You can look it up, figure out the episodes that I watched. But this kind of taught me a lot about the Thomas and Friends characters and such, and it also gave me a bit of an idea. I recognised loads and loads of engines from the show. I saw some of the other characters. I recognised that Duck was a pannier tank. I'm sure the Flying Scotsman was in one of the episodes I saw. Stephenson's rocket was there. I thought, blimey, that's Stephenson's rocket. So that gave me an idea. I thought I could make a video about this. I could take the Thomas and Friends characters and I can show what they look like in real life. I mean, Thomas, for example, he of course was an E2 in real life. So I took all of the ones I could think of and I put them into a video called Thomas and Friends Locomotives in Real Life. And this video just knocked me for 6. I got over 1 million views on this video. Never expected it to do as well as that. But yeah, this is what made me think, you know, people really love these Thomas videos. I'm going to start doing these on a more regular basis. So from there I decided to get some more of the Thomas and Friends characters by Hornby, and one of the characters I did was, I think, my favourite Thomas character, which is Gordon. And here is Gordon. This is the Hornby Gordon that I reviewed all of those years ago. And I don't understand what it is about Gordon, specifically this Gordon model, but there seems to be some magic about him. I couldn't explain it to you, but when I uploaded this review, the review wasn't particularly good, it wasn't particularly polished, it was long and rambling. I mean, so are my reviews today. There was nothing remarkable about it, but the views on this video were just crazy. Hundreds of thousands of people flocked to this video for years and years. I had thousands of likes, loads, hundreds and hundreds of comments. For some reason, people just loved the Hornby Gordon, which was awesome because, like I say, he was my favourite character before I even made the review. So always a strong connection with Gordon. I loved him in the show, and I love the Hornby model of him as well. So yeah, I think this Gordon model gave me and my channel a huge gift, really. This remains my most popular and most viewed review of all time, which is absolutely crazy, isn't it? So yes, thank you, Gordon. Always very special. Anyway, so at this point we're talking about 2017. I reviewed the rest of the models available in Hornby's range, but unfortunately by this time Hornby's Thomas range was really dwindling. They had produced loads of characters back in the good old days, I guess, but by this point there was only a few still available. We're talking James, Gordon, Henry, Percy, Thomas, a lot of the others, Bill and Ben, Toby. I'm sure there's lots of other characters. They'd all sort of disappeared from the range. The range was shrinking quite a lot, but I heard about another company. Well, I knew about Bachmann, of course, but I heard about their Thomas and Friends range. But it was a little bit tricky to get a hold of some of these models because they weren't available in this country. They weren't available in the UK. They were produced for the American market. They were available in America, which made it quite difficult to get hold of some of those models for me. So here comes another very big important player in my Thomas and Friends journey, and that is Totally Thomas. So this is a website, I think they are based in the UK, and they basically import all sorts of Thomas merchandise, including the Bachmann Thomas and Friends range, and make it available over here in the UK. Now obviously lots of the Bachmann Thomas and Friends range today is available in the UK, but back in those days it wasn't. It was Hornby who had the license for the British Thomas and Friends range, and like I say, it was a bit naff compared with the Bachmann models. So the difference, in a nutshell, I could probably make a video about this, but the difference is a lot of the Hornby models, not all of them, but a lot of them were just recycled from Hornby's existing models. I struggle to say that sentence, I don't know why. So they didn't design their characters from scratch. They took models that they already had in their range, put a face on them, put a new paint job on them. Let's call it Gordon, let's call it James. That's it. With Bachmann, they seem to put a lot more effort into their models. They design the characters from scratch, from the rails up, so that they looked like their characters from TV, and I wanted a piece of this. So the first character I reviewed from Bachmann's range, I think, was Emily, and I was really impressed by Emily. I thought she looked absolutely fantastic. I never liked the mechanisms in the Bachmann range as much as I liked the Hornby mechanisms. I do think the Hornby mechanisms were better quality than Bachmann's, but otherwise I think the Bachmann range was a lot better than Hornby's, and over the years I reviewed the vast majority really of the Bachmann range. But then the next year, in 2018, something really bad happened to the modelling Thomas community over here in the UK. And that was that after 33 years of producing their range, Hornby announced that they would be discontinuing the range and it would never be seen again. And even to this day, Hornby have never produced any more Thomas models. Now that was a massive blow to us over here in the UK. Of course there was Bachmann, but like I say, Bachmann only had a license to produce their range for the American market. It was Hornby and only Hornby who made these models for the UK. And now that range was gone. So that was a real blow, and so I decided that I would stop reviewing Thomas and Friends models for a little while and try something a little bit different with my channel. And that was, I was going to start trying to make some of my own stories. And so James's Accident was born. Now I did a bit of a trial the year before James's Accident with a video called Gordon and the Turntable, and that was super popular. Again, Gordon again, don't know what it is about him. People seem to just be drawn to Gordon and my channel. But the real splash was James's Accident the next year. This video absolutely went insane. It's had over 1 million views again, nearly 2 million in this case. Crazy reception, thousands of likes and comments. It soon became the most popular video on this channel, and it still is to this day. Nothing else has been able to beat it. And honestly, I'm really proud of this video. I think it is the best Thomas and Friends video I ever created. I put so much time into it. I'm told the story's pretty decent. Yeah, I really put everything into that video, and I'm so glad that it did as well as it did do. But there was one problem with creating videos like that. I loved making it, I wanted to make more, but it took 2 weeks to make, maybe a little over 2 weeks if I think about it. I had to write the story, I had to film it, that didn't take very long, but then editing it together, doing all of the voices and the music and the facial animations, that was the big thing. It took forever to do all of those. And like I say, 2 weeks, maybe a little more than 2 weeks, was just too long for me. I release 3 videos a week on this channel, which means each video needs to take 2, maybe 3 days at most. This video took 2 to 3 weeks, which is just out of the question. So unfortunately, I never did another one. I wrote others and I was going to produce them, but obviously with a turnaround like I've got on this channel, 2 to 3 days per video, I just never figured out a way to make it, which is a real shame. So James's Accident remains, I think, my best work on the Thomas and Friends stories. And I still go back to that video once in a while just to check it out because it reminds me of a really good time, fun to make, and of course it's a fun video as well. Anyway, that wasn't the end for my reviews of the Bachmann Thomas and Friends range. Obviously things are a lot different today. Every couple of years, maybe every year actually, but at least every couple of years, Bachmann release a new model, so that gives me an excuse to make another Thomas and Friends video for the channel. So those videos aren't gone, I still make reviews. Obviously, Bachmann now produce their Thomas range for the UK, so UK modelers have a happy ending as well. We don't have to rely on imports anymore, even though they're often cheaper, so I still use Toutley Thomas to this day as well. But then just a couple of years ago in 2023, something really special happened. I got to meet the real Thomas, if you like, or at least one of them. So this all happened because, once again, of my friend Dan, or TARDIS Rescue, who started it all. So thank you, Dan, I appreciate that. Anyway, Dan stayed in contact with the world of Thomas and Friends through his adult life as well, and this took him to the Talyllyn Railway, where he volunteers, where he does all sorts of different work, from exhibiting Awdry's original layout and the models, to organising events like the Awdry Extravaganza, which we went to last summer, and it was a lot of fun. And he was kind enough to bring one of Awdry's very own Thomas models right here to the Sam's Trains Railway, into this room, and run him on my tracks alongside my engines, and to let me make a video with it. Now, this was just an unbelievable honour. I think in that video I didn't really say enough about how I felt about it, because I was just kind of overwhelmed by it. This was an object that the Reverend W. Awdry himself, the guy who created all of this, had actually worked on with his own hands. It was his idea. He painted it, he modified it, he used it on his own layout. That is just a crazy thing, and here it was on my railway. Just incredible. But a bit of a secret for you, this was not the first time I'd met this Thomas. He'd secretly been to visit me once before, and I didn't tell anyone about it because I wasn't sure if he'd supposed to have visited me. Hopefully it's okay for me to talk about this now, but yeah, this Thomas model had been running quite badly. And so, knowing that I know my stuff about these sorts of things, model mechanisms and repairs and such, Dan brought it to me and he ran it a little bit on this railway for me. And as soon as I saw this Thomas model running, I said, this model should not be working. This model is like a ticking time bomb. If he keeps working, he is going to burn out and be damaged. So to give you a bit of background on this, the Thomas model that we're talking about runs on one of these motors. This is an EXO 4 motor. And these motors are fantastic. They're super well built, they're really reliable, and that's why so many of them still work to this day, including the one in Thomas. But the thing is, Thomas was built in the 1980s, over 40 years old at this point, and obviously that's quite a long time. And what happens with these motors over time is that the magnet at the back here slowly loses its strength with every year that passes. And the magnet inside this Thomas model was almost completely dead. I put my screwdriver onto it and I could feel basically nothing. Now, the really scary part about this is that with a dead magnet, the motor will still work. And it'll work kind of badly, but you might not think there's anything wrong with it. But behind the scenes, under the surface, things are going terribly wrong. With a weak magnet like that, the motor draws way more power than it's supposed to. The wires in the motor, look at these delicate, tiny, thin wires. These wires pass twice as much power as they're supposed to. That gets them really hot, and if you don't sort this out, the motors can burn out, and I've done that many times. Now, when I saw that Thomas's magnet was like this, I said, we need to do something about this. I don't want to see this absolutely legendary model from the Reverend W. Awdry himself burn out and be damaged. So I offered to help, and this involved taking out the motor, stripping the brushes off it, putting this into my remagnetizing machine and sort of fixing the issue. Now, I had done this hundreds of times, possibly 1,000 times at this point. I knew what I was doing, and yet I have never struggled so much to pull this simple job off. My hands were shaking. I knew that if I messed this up, the consequences would be dire. I would have ruined something incredibly special. So it took me 3 times as long as it usually does. Like I say, my hands were shaking. I was doing everything so slowly. I was struggling to get the brushes in and out of the thing, but luckily I was able to recharge the magnet and put it all back together without doing any damage, and Thomas immediately ran so much better. So it was terrifying at the time, it really was. I would say I enjoyed the experience, but I didn't, it was horrible. But it was a great honour to put my small mark on such a legendary relic from this community, I suppose. And like I say, magnets go bad over time, so maybe one day I'll meet Thomas and possibly some more of his friends in the future. I don't know, but that's one of my little stories. Happy ending, of course, and amazing to be able to meet this legendary model. And this takes us up to the present day, really. Just last year, in 2024, in the summer, Chloe and I took a trip to the Talyllyn Railway, which is such an important place when it comes to the Railway series and Thomas and Friends. Of course, that's the railway where the Reverend Awdry himself volunteered for many years, and so many of the stories in the Railway series were inspired by real events that took place on that railway. Some of the characters are there as well. It's a narrow gauge railway, so not so much the sort of standard gauge characters, but certainly some of the narrow gauge characters that you'll be familiar with. A lot of those were inspired by the Talyllyn locomotives and trains that run there. Plus, during the Awdry Extravaganza exhibition, I was able to see some of Awdry's other Thomas models, some of Thomas's actual friends. That was a great moment as well, to be able to see some of these other original locomotives too. And besides that, it was just fascinating and almost a bit surreal to go to the Talyllyn and see where the Reverend Awdry himself spent so much of his time. Not something I'd ever done before, so yeah, last year that was another first. So there you have it. I think that in a nutshell is pretty much my story from start to finish of Thomas and Friends and the Railway series, and how I've kind of connected with it over my life. Obviously, this is an incredible community, and it has been an honour to play just a tiny little part in this community. And obviously, Thomas looks a little different than he used to now. They've gone in a very different direction with the TV series now. But no matter what happens with the TV series, I know that Thomas and Friends and this community is going to live on forever, because it is an amazing community. And the fandom just keeps getting passed along. People have children, they pass Thomas and Friends and the magic of Thomas and Friends and the Railway series onto those children, and it just keeps going. And here we are 80 years on, and there's still a massive community made up of young and old people. You know, not just old people who are going to die and leave Thomas forgotten. That was a bit morbid, sorry. No, there's kids and young people, people my age, people who are 40, 50, 20, 12, 3, that just love Thomas and Friends. So this is something that is here to stay, and that's super awesome. But no matter what happens in the future, and yes, this community and this fandom is going to live on to 200 to 300 years old, but we were all people who were here within the first 80 years. And that is something nobody can take away from us. So thank you so much for watching. Please do share your story of Thomas and Friends. Feel free to make it more brief than mine, because that would take a long time to type if you did what I did. But yeah, share your stories with Thomas and Friends. Let me know how you found Thomas, how you found the Railway series down in the comments if you'd like to. But yeah, happy anniversary to the Railway series. Thank you to the Reverend W. Awdry for starting all of this, and it continues to amaze me where this journey went from a simple publication in May 1945 to what we have today. Inspirational. Right, cheers folks, you take care.